We've decided that this year we'll celebrate without you, Elizabeth. It's just easier that way. Charlotte didn't even look up from her avocado toast when she said it. The air in the bistro turned to ice, and my son, Henry, suddenly found his coffee very interesting. I didn't say a word. I just sat there, feeling the weight of 40 years of motherhood crumbling in a single, casual sentence. My name is Elizabeth Carter. I am 74 years old, and for 35 of those years, I navigated the shark-infested waters of corporate law. I've stared down billionaire CEOs and dismantled fraudulent contracts without breaking a sweat. In the courtroom, I was known as the Iron Gavel. I retired 5 years ago, hoping to trade my briefcases for a quiet life, garden roses, and the warmth of my only son, Henry. Henry was my miracle child, the one I raised alone after his father passed away when he was just 7. Everything I built, every late night at the firm, every sacrifice, it was all for him. He's a good man, or at least I thought he was, but he has a gentle soul that often gets trampled. Then came Charlotte Brown. Charlotte is 32, sharp-edged, and ambitious in a way that reminds me of my younger self, though she lacks the grace I worked so hard to maintain. When they married 3 years ago, I opened my heart and my home to her. I wanted to be the supportive mother-in-law I never had. I gave them the down payment for their house, hosted every holiday, and stepped back to give them space. But lately, space has started to feel like an intentional exile. I'm no longer the matriarch. I'm a ghost at my own table, a relic of a past they are eager to bury. There is a specific kind of silence that haunts a house once filled with the echoes of a growing child. Since I retired, that silence has been my constant companion. I find myself sitting in my wingback chair, my hands once so steady while signing multi-million-dollar deals now trembling slightly as I rest them on my lap. I look at the liver spots on my skin and the way my veins map out a long, tiring journey, and I feel a profound sense of fragility that my legal mind refuses to accept. My deepest fear isn't death, it's irrelevance. It's the terrifying realization that I am becoming a burden in the eyes of the person I love most. When I'm with Henry and Charlotte, I catch myself overthinking every gesture. If I offer advice on their garden, is it meddling? If I ask about their finances, am I being controlling? I see the way Charlotte's eyes dart toward the ceiling when I repeat a story about Henry's childhood. It makes me pull my shoulders in, trying to take up less space, trying to be invisible so I won't be rejected. My face, which used to be a mask of unshakable confidence, now betrays me. I feel my lower lip twitch when Charlotte makes a snide comment about old-fashioned values. I've started gripping my handbag so tightly during our Sunday brunches that my knuckles turn white, a physical manifestation of me holding on to the last shreds of my dignity. I see the pity in Henry's eyes sometimes, and it hurts worse than anger. Pity means I'm already failing. The trauma of losing my husband so young taught me to be self-reliant, to never show weakness. But now, at 74, the armor is heavy. I just want to be seen. I want to be told that I still matter, that my presence isn't an obligation but a gift. But as I sat across from them at that brunch, watching Charlotte's perfectly manicured fingers play with her gold necklace, I realized that to her, I was just a line item in their schedule that she was ready to audit. My eyes grew misty, a rare lapse in my defenses, and I had to look away at the passing traffic to hide the fact that my heart was shattering. I felt small. For the first time in my life, the iron gavel felt like it was made of glass, ready to splinter at the slightest touch. Before that cold Sunday at the bistro, I truly believed we were building something beautiful. I had made it my mission to be the cool mother-in-law, the one who understood boundaries and offered support without strings attached. For the first 2 years of their marriage, our relationship felt like a gentle spring morning, full of hope and light. I remember the laughter that used to fill my kitchen when Charlotte would come over to learn my secret pot roast recipe. We would sip Chardonnay and talk about her career in marketing, and I felt a genuine spark of sisterhood with her. I saw myself in her drive, and I wanted to be her biggest cheerleader. Henry seemed so happy then. He would call me 3 times a week just to chat, and every other Friday, they would stop by for a quick drink that inevitably turned into a 3-hour dinner. Those evenings were the highlight of my week. I would set the table with my grandmother's lace cloth, light the scented candles, and prepare their favorite appetizers. There was a sense of delight, a joyful harmony that made me feel like my retirement was exactly what I had dreamed it would be. I wasn't just a retired lawyer. I was the heart of a family. I was generous too. When they wanted to renovate their kitchen, I wrote a check for $20,000 as a moving-in gift. When Charlotte mentioned she loved a specific designer handbag, it appeared on her doorstep for her birthday. I did these things not to buy their love, but to express mine. Everything was light, easy, and filled with gentleness, a softness I hadn't allowed myself during my years in the courtroom. We went on weekend trips to the coast, shared inside jokes about Henry's messy habits, and planned for a future where I would be the doting grandmother to their children. I thought I had done everything right. I listened more than I spoke. I complimented Charlotte's style and her professional achievements. I made sure never to drop by unannounced. I thought we were a team, a trio bonded by love and mutual respect. But looking back now, I realized the smiles were becoming forced, the laughter a bit too high-pitched. The warmth was slowly being replaced by a calculated politeness that I was too blinded by love to see. The shift didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, agonizing erosion of the ground I stood on. It started with skipped phone calls, then shifted to, "We're too busy" texts when I invited them over. But that brunch, the one where we were supposed to discuss the upcoming family anniversary, was where the mask finally slipped. As I sat there, the sunlight hitting the silverware in a way that felt blindingly bright, I realized I was being interrogated rather than included. Charlotte's demeanor had changed. Gone was the warmth I thought we shared. She leaned forward, her elbows on the table, invading my personal space in a way that felt like a tactical maneuver. "Elizabeth," she started, her voice dropping that sugary tone she usually used with me. "We've been thinking about the cruise for the 40th anniversary of your firm's founding. We've decided that this year, we'll celebrate without you. It's a lot of travel, and honestly, we just want to enjoy ourselves without worrying if you're getting tired or if the food suits your age." I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands, resting on the white tablecloth, suddenly felt like lead. I looked at Henry, my son, my only child. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was meticulously cutting a piece of sausage as if it were a surgical procedure. The betrayal stung more than the words themselves. I understood what she was doing. She was testing the fences, seeing how far she could push the old lady before I broke. In my mind, I was screaming. I wanted to remind her that I was the one who funded their lifestyle, the one who gave them the very house they slept in. But as a lawyer, I knew that losing your temper is losing the case. I kept my expression neutral, though I could feel the muscles in my jaw tightening until it ached. My eyes searched Charlotte's face, looking for a shred of the girl who used to laugh at my jokes, but all I saw was a cold, calculating ambition. She didn't just want me gone from the trip. She wanted to establish a new world order where I was a footnote. "Is that so?" I finally managed to say. My voice was steady, a ghost of the iron gavel, but inside, I was trembling. I felt a stinging behind my eyelids, that hot, prickly sensation of unshed tears. I looked down at my hands, my wedding ring, my graduation ring, symbols of a life built on hard work and loyalty. They looked so fragile against the clinical white of the table. Charlotte didn't stop. "We've already booked the suite, just for two. We think it's important for our marriage to have these milestones to ourselves. I'm sure you understand. You can always have a quiet tea here with your friends." She smiled then, a thin, predatory curve of the lips that didn't reach her eyes. She thought she had won. She thought because I was 74 and retired, I had lost my teeth. Every time she spoke, I felt a physical pang in my chest, a tightening of the heart. I watched the way she looked at Henry, a silent command for him to stay quiet, and I saw him obey. That was the hardest part, the silence of my own blood. I felt like I was being erased in real time. I wasn't a mother or a successful professional. I was a nuisance being managed. The happiness we once believed in was a lie. The truth was cold, transactional cruelty. I gripped my napkin under the table, my fingernails digging into my palms, using the physical pain to keep from crying. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Not here, not now. The silence that followed Charlotte's declaration was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I sat perfectly still, my posture as rigid as a marble statue, while the bustling sounds of the bistro, the clinking of glasses, the hum of distant laughter seemed to fade into a dull roar. I looked at Charlotte, who was now calmly sipping her mimosa, looking utterly satisfied with herself. Then, I turned my gaze to Henry. He finally looked up, but it wasn't the look of a son who loved his mother. It was the look of a man who was exhausted by a conflict he was too weak to finish. "Mom, don't make it a big deal," he whispered, his voice lacking any conviction. "Charlotte's right. We just need some time to ourselves. You're always there. It's a lot." That was the moment the glass shattered. Always there. The words felt like a physical blow to my stomach. I thought about the late-night calls when their furnace broke, the weekends I spent helping them paint their fence, and the $20,000 check that was still clearing in their bank account. I wasn't always there out of a desire to intrude. I was there because they had invited me, used me, and relied on me until they no longer found it convenient. Suddenly, the sadness that had been weighing me down evaporated, replaced by a cold, familiar clarity. It was the same feeling I used to get in a deposition when a witness finally tripped over their own lie. My legal brain, dormant for years, suddenly clicked back into high gear. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but instead of making me explode, it made me sharp. I looked down at my hands, they weren't trembling anymore. I laid them flat on the table, a gesture of absolute control. I looked at Charlotte's gold necklace, the one I had bought her for Christmas, and then at the designer watch on Henry's wrist, another gift from his smothering mother. A wave of realization washed over me. I had played the role of the doting grandmother to be so well that I had forgotten I was still the woman who had built an empire from nothing. They saw an old woman they could push around. They saw a bank account with a face. They didn't see Elizabeth Carter, the iron gavel. My eyes narrowed, and I felt my facial muscles settle into a mask of pure, professional ice. I didn't blink. I watched Charlotte's expression shift from smugness to a slight, flickering uncertainty. She saw the change in me. She saw the lawyer return. The turning point wasn't just about their betrayal, it was about my own awakening. I realized that my kindness had been mistaken for weakness, and my silence for consent. I felt a surge of energy, an eruption of self-preservation rising from my toes to my fingertips. My body felt light, capable, and dangerous. I realized that if they wanted to celebrate without me, they were going to get exactly what they asked for in ways they hadn't even begun to calculate. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to beg for an invitation to a cruise I had probably paid for indirectly. I was going to remind them whose name was on the foundation of their lives. I leaned in just an inch, my eyes locking onto Charlotte's. The air between us felt charged with electricity. I saw her hand tremble slightly as she reached for her glass. Good. She should be nervous. I wasn't the victim of this story. I was the architect of their current reality, and I had just decided to stop building. This was the moment I stopped being poor Elizabeth and started being the woman who knew exactly where the bodies were buried and who held the keys to the cemetery. I didn't utter a single word of protest at that table. I simply stood up, adjusted my silk scarf with the steady hands of a surgeon, and walked out of that bistro. The justice-building phase of my life didn't start with a scream. It started with a phone call to my former law partner, Arthur. By the time I reached my car, the emotional haze had vanished, replaced by the cold, tactical brilliance that had once made me the most feared litigator in the state. If they wanted a life without me, I would give them the full experience of independence, starting with their finances. The first thing I did when I got home was sit at my mahogany desk and open my laptop. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a grim sense of satisfaction. I logged into the joint trust fund I had established for Henry's future family needs. Within 10 minutes, I had revoked his access to the discretionary spending account. I watched the digital balance, the one that paid for Charlotte's Pilates memberships, their high-end grocery deliveries, and their weekend getaways drop to zero in his view. I felt a surge of perverse delight, a dark joy, knowing that the next time they tried to swipe that card for a celebratory bottle of champagne, it would be declined. But I wasn't done. I am a woman of records. I spent the next 4 hours meticulously gathering every piece of evidence of the loans I had given them. I pulled the bank transfers for the $20,000 kitchen renovation, which I had strategically documented as a repayable loan contingent on family cohesion in the fine print they never bothered to read. I printed out the gift tax filings and the emails where Charlotte had explicitly promised to pay me back once her bonus came in, a bonus she had used to buy a car instead. Then came the camera moment. I called a security firm I had used for years. I want the full suite, I told them. Motion sensors, cloud-based audio-visual recording, and I want the locks on my property changed by sunset. I still own the small guest cottage they were using as a home office and storage space. I drove over there while they were still out at their brunch-turned-celebration. I watched from my car as the locksmith swapped the cylinders. I felt a chill of anticipation, a tense excitement, as I realized I was literally locking them out of my life. I then met with Arthur at his private office. We sat, surrounded by the smell of old leather and law books. "Elizabeth," he said, looking over my documents, "this is thorough, even for you." I leaned back, my face a mask of professional resolve. "They think I'm a senile old woman, Arthur. They think they can take the harvest and burn the farmer. I want you to draft a formal demand for the repayment of the kitchen loan, effective immediately. And I want a notice of eviction for the guest cottage." The tension in the room was palpable. I felt a strange mix of tension and dark humor. The irony of a mother suing her own son wasn't lost on me, but the humor lay in the look I knew would be on Charlotte's face. I wasn't just being petty, I was reclaiming my boundaries. I spent the evening recording a video diary on my phone, documenting my mental state and my reasons, ensuring that if they tried to claim I was unfit or confused, I had a digital trail of my razor-sharp lucidity. As I sat in my darkened living room later that night, watching the live feed from my new security cameras on my tablet, I saw their car pull up to the guest cottage. I watched Charlotte jump out, her face twisted in confusion as her key failed to turn in the lock. I saw Henry pacing, looking at his phone, likely seeing the transaction decline notifications popping up like digital ghosts. My eyes were cold, my expression unmoving. I felt a profound sense of deservedness, worthiness. I had spent a lifetime building a fortress, and I had foolishly let the wolves inside the gates. Now, the gates were shut, and I was the one holding the keys. The counterattack wasn't slow. By Tuesday morning, the war had moved from the shadows to my front porch. I watched through the doorbell camera as Henry and Charlotte stormed up the steps, their faces distorted by a cocktail of fury and desperation. When I opened the door, Charlotte didn't even wait for a greeting. Her face was flushed, her eyes darting like a trapped animal. "What do you think you're doing, Elizabeth?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Declining our cards? Changing the locks? This is elder abuse. You've finally lost your mind, haven't you?" Henry stood behind her, his face a mask of pale exhaustion. "Mom, please," he said, but his voice was different, colder, sharper. "We've called Dr. Aris. We told him you're having some kind of episode, paranoid delusions. Locking us out of the cottage, claiming the renovation money was a loan. You're clearly not yourself." I felt a shiver of pure, icy hatred run down my spine. They weren't just angry, they were trying to gaslight a woman who had spent 40 years spotting lies for a living. They had actually called my physician to suggest I was mentally incompetent just to regain control of the checkbook. Charlotte took a step forward, her finger pointing at my chest. "We're calling the authorities, Elizabeth. We're going to look into a legal guardianship. You're a danger to yourself and our family's stability. You can't just take back things you gave us because your feelings got hurt at brunch." I watched them with a detached, clinical observation. My body felt heavy, my feet rooted to the floor like an old oak tree. I looked at Henry, searching for any flicker of the boy who used to bring me dandelions. But all I saw was a man willing to declare his mother insane to protect his lifestyle. The drama was no longer about a cruise. It was about my very identity. Charlotte began filming me with her phone, her voice shifting into a fake, soothing tone. "Elizabeth, honey, you look confused. Just let us in so we can call the doctor together. You're not well." The psychological warfare was blatant. They wanted me to scream, to break down, to provide the very evidence of instability they needed for their petition. I felt the urge to cry, to let the deep inner anguish of a betrayed mother take over, but the lawyer in me took the wheel. I kept my face perfectly still, my eyes wide and unblinking. I felt the tension in my hands as I gripped the doorframe, my knuckles white, absorbing the shock of their cruelty. They weren't just family anymore. They were adversaries in a high-stakes litigation, and they had just committed the ultimate sin. They underestimated my resolve. The air on the porch was thick with Charlotte's performative concern and Henry's silent betrayal. Charlotte was still holding her phone up, recording me, her voice dripping with that manufactured sympathy. "See? Henry? She's just staring. She's completely catatonic. We need to get the papers signed before she hurts herself." She actually reached out to touch my arm, a gesture so condescending it made my skin crawl. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Charlotte," I said. My voice was low, resonant, and carried the weight of 1,000 closing arguments. I stepped back, opening the door wider to reveal Arthur sitting in my foyer, his briefcase open, and a digital recorder running on the side table. Standing next to him was a tall man in a dark suit, a private investigator I had hired years ago for the firm. The color drained from Charlotte's face so fast I thought she might faint. Her phone hand dropped. "Who? What is this?" she stammered. "This," I said, stepping into my power as the iron gavel, "is the truth. The truth you were so eager to bury." I gestured for them to enter. They walked in like condemned prisoners. Arthur cleared his throat, his face a mask of professional boredom. "Henry, Charlotte, we've been monitoring the digital footprint of the guest cottage and the shared accounts for the last 48 hours. We also have the transcript of the call you made to Dr. Aris this morning." He looked up, his eyes sharp behind his spectacles. "Attempting to induce a medical professional to declare a sane person incompetent for financial gain is a very serious matter. In this state, it's called fraudulent procurement of guardianship." I watched Charlotte's eyes dart around the room, looking for an exit. She tried to pivot. "We were just worried. Elizabeth, you were acting so strange." "I was acting silent," I interrupted, my gaze locking onto hers. "And in that silence, I listened. While you were planning your celebration without me, I was reviewing the security footage from the guest cottage." I pulled out my tablet and hit play. The screen showed Charlotte and her sister in the cottage 3 weeks ago. They weren't working. They were going through my files, looking for my will, laughing about how the old bird was finally losing her grip and how they would sell my house the moment I was placed in a home. The audio was crystal clear. Charlotte's voice on the recording said, asterisk, once we get her declared, we'll take the cruise and she'll pay for the whole thing from her medical fund, asterisk. The silence that followed was absolute. Henry looked like he had been struck by lightning. He looked at his wife, then at me, then at the floor. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion. It was a recorded, time-stamped fact. I have also filed a formal report regarding the $20,000 loan, Arthur continued, sliding a stack of papers across the table. Since the conditions of family cohesion were breached by the documented conspiracy to commit elder fraud, the full amount is due within 24 hours. Otherwise, we proceed with a lien on your primary residence. I stood up, feeling a sense of satisfaction, a fulfillment so deep it reached my bones. I looked at my son. You had a mother who would have given you the world, Henry. But you chose to let someone treat me like a chore to be managed. I turned to Charlotte, who was now trembling, her bravado shattered. You wanted to celebrate without me? You got your wish. You are officially removed from my will, my life, and my property. The police are waiting at the end of the driveway to escort you off the premises. If you set foot on this land again, you will be arrested for trespassing. The face flip was complete. I wasn't the victim. I was the victor. I watched them stumble out of my house, the weight of their own greed finally crushing them. The truth wasn't just out. It was a cage they had built for themselves. The sound of the front door clicking shut felt like the final gavel strike in the most important case of my life. I stood by the window, my hand resting lightly on the velvet curtain, watching the red and blue lights of the patrol car fade into the distance as they escorted Henry and Charlotte's vehicle off my property. For the first time in years, the air in my home felt light. The suffocating fog of trying to please the unpleasable had lifted, leaving behind a crisp, cool clarity. I had won. I had protected my legacy, my dignity, and my future. I walked through my house, touching the familiar objects, the mahogany banister, the framed photos of a son who no longer existed in the way I remembered, the law books that represented my life's work. There was a profound sense of completion, a deep, visceral satisfaction. I wasn't just Elizabeth the mother anymore. I was Elizabeth Carter, a woman of substance and sovereignty. I went to my desk and picked up the cruise brochures Charlotte had left behind during one of her visits to scout my assets. I didn't tear them up. I simply walked over to the fireplace and dropped them into the wastebasket. I didn't need their crumbs of affection or their pity-filled invitations. I was free. Yet, as I sat down in my favorite wingback chair, the victory felt bittersweet. A tear, hot and heavy, finally escaped and traced a path through the wrinkles on my cheek. I felt a profound sadness for the boy I had raised. I thought of the late nights I spent working to ensure he never lacked for anything, the sports games I attended while exhausted, and the dreams I had for our family. To see that love traded for the cold greed of a woman like Charlotte was a betrayal that no court ruling could fully heal. I had saved my bank account, but I had lost my son to his own weakness. But then, I looked at my hands. They were steady. My heart, though bruised, was beating with a renewed purpose. I realized that for decades, I had been living for Henry. Every decision, every gift, every sacrifice was centered on his happiness. And in doing so, I had allowed myself to be diminished. No more. I was reclaiming my life. I was going to travel, but not on their terms. I was going to garden, but not so I could give the flowers to someone who didn't appreciate them. I was going to spend my money on the causes I cared about and the friends who actually valued my company. The feeling of being justified returned, stronger this time. I had taught them a lesson, yes, but more importantly, I had taught myself one. My worth is not determined by my utility to my children. I stood up, walked to my sideboard, and poured myself a glass of the finest scotch I owned, the bottle I had been saving for a special family occasion. I raised the glass to my reflection in the mirror. I looked at the iron gavel staring back at me. She was older, yes. Her hair was whiter, and her eyes were tired, but she was standing tall. To me, I whispered. I felt a surge of liberation, a unshackling of the soul. I was no longer waiting for a phone call that would never come or an apology that wouldn't be sincere. I was the master of my own house and the author of my final chapters. The silence of the house was no longer haunting, it was peaceful. It was the sound of a woman who had finally found her own voice again. I sat back, took a sip of the amber liquid, and began to plan a trip to the Italian coast, a celebration for one, and it was going to be magnificent. The house stayed quiet after the lawyers and the police left, but my mind was a storm. I sat in the dim light of the library, the amber liquid in my glass catching the glow of the single desk lamp. My hands, which had been so steady during the confrontation, began to tremble. not with fear, but with the crushing weight of reality. I stared at a framed photograph on the mantel, Henry at age 6, missing a front tooth and clutching a plastic dinosaur. Back then, I was his entire world. Now, I was the woman who had just served him with an eviction notice. A wave of guilt washed over me, cold and suffocating. Did I fail him? As a lawyer, I knew how to win, but as a mother, did I teach him how to be a man of character? I wondered if my own strength, the very iron gavel persona I wore like armor, had somehow smothered his ability to stand up for himself. Maybe I had been too controlling, too generous, creating a vacuum where his backbone should have been. I felt a sharp tug, a tearing in my soul, questioning if my response was righteous justice or just a high-stakes act of vengeance. I looked at my reflection in the dark window glass. My eyes looked hollow, the lines around my mouth etched deep by years of suppressed emotion. I touched my face, feeling the papery texture of my skin. I had spent my life protecting Henry from the world, only to realize I couldn't protect him from his own choices. The distinction between right and wrong in the situation felt blurred. Yes, they tried to defraud me. Yes, they were cruel. But he is my son, my only blood. The thought of him being homeless or financially ruined sent a pang of agony through my chest that made it hard to breathe. But then, I remembered Charlotte's face, the predatory glint in her eyes when she thought I was catatonic. I remembered Henry's silence when she claimed I was losing my mind. That wasn't just a mistake, it was a calculated betrayal. If I had let it slide, I wouldn't be loving, I would be a victim. My jaw tightened again. I realized that my internal conflict stemmed from a version of Henry that no longer existed. The boy with the dinosaur was gone. In his place was a man who had stood by while his wife tried to strip his mother of her basic human rights. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, feeling the tears finally dry on my cheeks. The conflict didn't vanish, but it settled into a grim acceptance. To love someone doesn't mean allowing them to destroy you. My eyes opened, sharp and clear once more. I realized that by holding them accountable, I was performing the final, most painful act of parenting, teaching them that actions have consequences. It was a lonely victory, but as I gripped the arms of my chair, I knew I couldn't have lived with the alternative. I was right to stand up, even if it meant sitting alone in the silence I had fought so hard to create. The most profound realization didn't come from a law book or a courtroom victory. It came from the silence of my own living room. I learned that being a mother doesn't mean being a martyr. For years, I operated under the delusion that if I just gave enough money, time, space, I could secure a place in my son's heart. I learned that boundaries are not barriers to love, they are the very foundation of respect. I realized that my identity had become dangerously entangled with my utility to others. When I stopped being useful, I felt I stopped being valuable. But through this ordeal, I discovered that my worth is intrinsic. I am Elizabeth Carter, a woman of intellect, resilience, and history. I learned that silence isn't just a lack of noise, it is a position of strength. By not arguing at that brunch, I kept my power. I learned that you cannot change people who don't see an issue with their own behavior, and trying to do so is a waste of the precious time I have left. I decided that from this moment forward, I will no longer be a spectator in my own life. To improve my relationship with the world, I began by reclaiming my schedule and my spirit. I didn't reach out to Henry with an olive branch. Instead, I reached out to a local community center to mentor young women entering the legal field. I want to pass on my wisdom to those who value it, rather than those who see it as an obstacle. I've started a living trust for a scholarship fund, ensuring my hard-earned legacy supports those with merit rather than entitlement. I am also planning that trip to Italy, but this time, I've invited an old friend from law school, someone who knows me for who I am, not what I can provide. I am investing in relationships built on reciprocity, not obligation. I am moving from a place of giving until it hurts, to sharing where it heals. Looking back, I see the flaw in how I handled the early years of their marriage. My misstep was in the blissful generosity I allowed myself. I was so afraid of being the difficult mother-in-law that I became a doormat. I shielded Henry from the realities of adult responsibility for far too long, and in doing so, I left him vulnerable to a woman like Charlotte. I should have set financial boundaries from day one. I should have spoken up the first time I felt disrespected, rather than swallowing my pride until it turned into a bitter pill. However, I realized that these mistakes were made out of a desperate, honest love. I had to do what I did to survive. The non-negotiable requirement for my peace of mind was cutting off their financial lifeline entirely. It was a harsh surgery, but necessary to remove the toxicity. I am at peace with the fact that I protected myself. It wasn't an act of malice, but an act of self-rescue. The story I've shared isn't just about a brunch gone wrong or a cruise invitation withheld. It is a cautionary tale about the delicate architecture of family dynamics and the high price of silence. To my friends and peers across America, I want to emphasize one truth. Empathy is a virtue, but without boundaries, it becomes a liability. In our culture, we are often told that a mother's love should be unconditional and bottomless. We are encouraged to keep the peace and not rock the boat, especially as we age. But I am here to tell you that peace bought at the cost of your dignity is no peace at all. It is merely a stay of execution. Communication is the lifeblood of any relationship, yet it is often the first thing we sacrifice to avoid conflict. If I had been more transparent about my expectations and less indulgent with my bank account, perhaps the boundaries would have been clearer from the start. We must learn to speak our truths when they are small, so they don't grow into monsters that devour our families. If someone tells you that you are too much or always there while they are simultaneously reaching into your pockets, believe their actions, not their excuses. Boundaries are not an act of aggression. They are an act of self-respect. They define where you end and where another person begins. When we fail to set them, we invite people to treat us like territory rather than individuals. To the younger generation, remember that the old-fashioned values of respect and gratitude are not optional. They are the currency of a healthy society. You cannot build your happiness on the ruins of the person who built you. Empathy must go both ways. It is not enough for a parent to empathize with the busy lives of their children. Children must also empathize with the humanity and the legacy of their parents. We are not just safety nets or ATM machines. We are people with hearts that still break and minds that still sharp. To anyone standing in the shoes I once wore, feeling small and ignored at your own family table, find your gavel, use your voice. Your life is your own until the very last breath, and you have every right to protect the peace you worked a lifetime to earn. True family doesn't demand you shrink so they can grow. They stand beside you, honoring the space you take up. Standing up for yourself is never easy, especially when it involves the people you love most. But as I've learned, your peace is worth the fight. Thank you for sitting with me today and listening to my story. I hope it serves as a reminder that it is never too late to reclaim your power and set the boundaries you deserve. You are the architect of your own happiness, no matter your age. If this story resonated with you, or if you've ever had to handle a difficult daughter-in-law or family situation of your own, please share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your support means the world to me. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next story. Every subscription helps us grow this community of strong, independent voices. Share this video with a friend who might need a little extra strength today. Thank you for being part of my journey. I'll see you in the next video, where we'll continue to explore the truth behind the closed doors of family life. Stay strong, stay dignified, and always remember your worth.